The flyer fluttered in the wind like an afterthought on the crowded bulletin board, wedged between an ad for tutoring services and a lost dog notice. Maria noticed it only because she was searching for anything that could ease her spiraling financial situation. The words were plain, but impossible to ignore. Luxury apartment for rent, $400 a month. Utilities included. Maria called the number immediately. The building, when she arrived, seemed out of place. Tucked between two high-rises, its clean, minimalist facade gleamed in stark contrast to the city's chaotic grime. A sense of disquiet prickled at her, but desperation overrode it. She had long since stopped trusting her instincts. They had failed her too often. Inside, she met Mr. Sutter, the landlord, a man so polished he looked like a mannequin brought to life. His tailored suit and precise speech exuded control. He handed her the lease with little fanfare, his thin smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Read it carefully," he said, though he seemed almost bored. The lease was unusually short for such an affordable place. Maria skimmed it, her eyes catching a peculiar clause. "Vacating the premises carries penalties beyond measure." "What does this mean?" she asked. "It's a deterrent against sudden departures," Sutter replied smoothly. "We value stability here." The way he emphasized stability unsettled her, but at $400 a month, she couldn't afford to nitpick. Signing the papers, she felt both relief and unease settle over her. Maria carried her last box up the narrow stairwell, her muscles aching, but her spirits oddly buoyant. The apartment itself was breathtakingly pristine, white walls, gleaming hardwood floors, and large windows that let in an unnatural stillness. As she unpacked, she noticed the silence. It wasn't the typical hum of city life muted by good insulation. It was oppressive, almost suffocating. Even her movements seemed muffled. The first strange event came that evening, when her phone lost signal entirely. She chalked it up to the building's structure interfering with reception. Still, a cold unease settled in. She tried to call her brother Tyler, and got only static. Later, as she was drifting to sleep, a sharp snap from the hallway startled her awake. Peering through the peephole, she saw nothing but shadows stretching unnaturally long under the faint overhead light. The next morning, she found a note slipped under her door. "You belong to it now." Maria decided to investigate her neighbors, seeking reassurance that the oddities were just her imagination. She met Mrs. Hopkins, an elderly woman from the floor below, who seemed eager to talk, but dodged direct questions about the building. "Lovely place, isn't it?" Mrs. Hopkins said, her voice thin and airy. "Once you're here, you never want to leave." Maria caught sight of Alex, a wiry man with restless eyes, pacing near the elevator. She struck up a conversation, but his paranoia was palpable. "You signed the lease, right?" Alex asked abruptly. "You can't break it. No one can. Don't even think about it." "What are you talking about?" Maria asked. Alex grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "Just stay inside, don't test it." That night, Maria was jolted awake by muffled sobbing outside her door. When she peeked out, she saw Alex hunched over, murmuring frantic apologies. The next day, his apartment was eerily empty. By the third day, Maria's unease boiled into defiance. She stormed to Mr. Sutter's office, demanding answers, but the space was barren, as if he had vanished. Frustrated, she decided to take a walk to clear her head. The moment her feet crossed the building's threshold, agony tore through her body. She collapsed on the sidewalk, clutching her stomach as blinding flashes of Tyler in pain overwhelmed her senses. A passerby helped her back inside, and the pain ceased immediately. Drenched in sweat and trembling, Maria barely noticed another note on her kitchen counter. Leaving has consequences. Desperate for clarity, she turned to Mrs. Hopkins, who only shook her head. "You're part of it now, dear," Mrs. Hopkins murmured. "The building doesn't just take tenants, it keeps them." Maria's search for answers led her to the basement, where she found an old tenant registry. Names were crossed out, accompanied by chilling notes. Vanished, suicide, accident. Her name was already on the list, untouched, but ominously dated. Determined to break free, Maria scoured the internet for any mention of the building's history. She uncovered fragments of articles, tenants disappearing, families devastated by mysterious tragedies, but nothing concrete. The building seemed deliberately erased from public memory. Her paranoia deepened, the walls seemed to breathe, and whispers grew louder. At one point, she thought she saw a shadow dart past her peripheral vision, only to find the room empty. Maria attempted to call Tyler again, but found herself unable to dial. The screen flickered ominously before the phone died altogether. She felt trapped, suffocated by the realization that the building was alive and it was watching her. Pushed to the brink, Maria tried writing notes for Tyler, apologizing for dragging him into her curse. As she wrote, her hands trembled, her words incoherent under the weight of despair. But she resolved to find a way out, if not for her, then for him. After days of searching, Maria finally cornered Mr. Sutter in his dimly lit office. The room had an oppressive stillness, much like the building itself. Sutter's calm demeanor hadn't changed, but there was an undercurrent of something darker now, as if the man were merely an extension of the structure. "What is this place?" Maria demanded, slamming the tenant registry onto his desk. Sutter regarded her with a faint smirk. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." When he spoke, his words felt rehearsed, detached, as though he'd delivered this speech 1,000 times. He explained that the building wasn't just a structure, but a living, consuming entity, sustained by the despair of its tenants. The lease wasn't just a legal document, but a binding contract, one that tied the tenant's soul to the building. "Why us?" Marie asked, her voice shaking. "Because you came," Sutter replied simply. "The building calls to those who are desperate enough to stay. And once you're here, there's no leaving without someone else paying the price." Maria pressed him for a way out, but Sutter was cryptic. "There's always a way, but it requires sacrifice," he said. Before she could demand more, he vanished, leaving her alone in the suffocating silence. Shaken but resolute, Maria knew she couldn't endure this purgatory indefinitely. She needed to escape, even if it meant destroying the building. She began seeking out tenants who might share her desperation. Her search led her to Samir, a young father who lived on the 4th floor. Samir had tried to leave once, only to watch his daughter fall mysteriously ill the moment he stepped outside. Like Maria, he was willing to risk everything to break the curse. Together, they delved deeper into the building's secrets. Maria discovered an unsettling detail from her research. Every major tragedy associated with the building occurred during an attempt to destroy it. Fires, structural collapses, even bombings. None had succeeded, and each claimed more lives than it saved. Despite the risk, Maria and Samir decided to try again. They theorized that the building's heart, the source of its power, was in the basement, where she had found the tenant registry. If they could destroy that, perhaps the curse could be broken. Maria and Samir descended into the basement late at night, armed with gasoline and lighters. The air grew heavier as they approached the door to the registry room, the faint whispers becoming a cacophony. Inside, they found what could only be described as the building's core. It was a pulsating mass of shadow and light that seemed to emanate from the walls. The registry lay open on a pedestal in front of it, glowing faintly. As they prepared to ignite the gasoline, the building fought back. Shadows emerged from the walls, forming twisted figures of former tenants. They wailed, begging Maria and Samir to stop. Samir hesitated, overcome by the ghost's pleas. One of the figures, his daughter's likeness, approached him, whispering, "Don't hurt us, Papa." He froze, and in that moment, a shadow engulfed him, leaving Maria alone. Fighting through her terror and grief, Maria set the gasoline alight. Flames erupted around her, and the building's screams echoed in her ears. As the fire spread, Maria felt the building retaliate. Pain coursed through her, worse than anything she'd experienced when she tried to leave. Shadows clawed at her, but she pressed forward, ensuring the flames reached every corner of the room. Through the agony, she thought of Tyler, her one tether to hope. The image of his smile drove her forward, even as the flames consumed her. She stumbled toward the exit, but the building began to collapse around her. With her last strength, Maria hurled the burning registry into the heart of the pulsating mass. A deafening silence followed as the core imploded, taking Maria with it. The morning after, the building was nothing but a smoldering ruin. Neighbors gathered at a safe distance, whispering about the inexplicable fire. Miles away, Tyler awoke to a strange sense of peace. He found a letter from Maria on his desk, though he had no recollection of receiving it. In her handwriting, she explained her sacrifice, urging him to live his life without fear or guilt. Back at the ruins, a passerby noticed an odd detail in the smoke rising from the lot. For a fleeting moment, they thought they saw faces, shadows of those who had been trapped in the building, including Maria, looking out with a mixture of sorrow and relief. The lot remained undeveloped for years, avoided by locals who claimed it was cursed. Occasionally, at night, faint whispers could be heard, and some swore they saw flickering lights where the building once stood. Maria's story ended there, but the sense of foreboding lingered.